Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained Podcast. My name is Dylan, and this has been recorded on the 5th of January, 2024. Now, in recent weeks, a certain group have been stealing a lot of headlines in geopolitics. Most of you probably know that I'm referring to the Houthis. We've seen many of the top shipping companies rerouting their trade. Rather than travelling through the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean, many are deciding to travel the entire coastline of Africa instead and enter the Mediterranean through the Gibraltar Strait. This is adding around 10 to 14 days onto global trade travel time, which is a big deal. So I've decided to dive into the group that are causing this chaos and how have they found themselves in a situation where they've been able to block one of the busiest global maritime trade routes. The region that Yemen sits in today has changed quite a lot since the end of World War I. Prior to World War I, it was under Ottoman control. Obviously, when the Ottomans lost World War I, this was no longer the case. This territory that was under Ottoman control was North Yemen. Now, that leads to the question, what of South Yemen? Assuming if there's a North Yemen, there must be a South Yemen. You'd be correct. The British were there from 1839 when they captured the port of Aden. For those interested, the process of the British leaving South Yemen is referred to as the Aden Emergency or the 14th October Revolution. For those interested, I'm not going to cover it in this piece, but the information is out there if you wish to research it further. When the British finally upped and left, we had the Yemen Arab Republic, which was formerly North Yemen, established through the coup in 1962. We also had South Yemen, which became a socialist state and was referred to as the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. Now, the split between these two saw quite a bit of fighting over the years. The relationship was a complicated one. It changed from hostile to fairly peaceful with each other. There were conflicts between North and South Yemen in 1972 and 1979. In 1972, after the conflict had subsided, the two nations declared that unification between them would eventually occur. The 1979 conflict between North and South Yemen was only stopped by the Arab League intervening. This unification finally occurred in 1990. A few years later, we saw the formation of the very group that we're discussing in this episode today, the Houthis. I'm going to fast forward through time slightly to the beginning of the current Yemeni civil war. Now, this civil war is one that is founded upon the differences between Shia and Sunni Muslims. When the Prophet Muhammad died, Muslims disagreed on who should become Muhammad's successor. That's the entire reason for the differences between Sunni. When the Houthis made this move, there was a response from the rest of the Gulf states. Now, importantly, The Houthis are a Shia Muslim group. Shia Muslims represent about 10% of the world's Muslims, and they're found quite heavily in Iran. Now, the Sunni Muslims represent 90% of the world's Muslims, and they're mainly found in Saudi Arabia. It was a coalition of the Gulf states led by Saudi Arabia that implemented economic isolation and started airstrikes on the Houthis in response to their coup attempt on the government. This was also supported by US intelligence. The civil war in Yemen, which can also be seen as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, has had a lot of back and forth over the years since the civil war started in 2014. We've had the Saudis attempt naval blockades to stop Iran supplying the Houthis, which Saudi Arabia and the United States have both said they have proof of. Iran has responded by dispatching naval convoys. We've had air campaigns over the years that have killed 19,000 civilians. And to show how modern warfare is changing, just as we've seen with the Houthis currently with their disruption in the Red Sea, we've seen drone attacks on Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states in response to their aggression. It's an important trend to consider in warfare in general, especially for groups that enjoy causing chaos and use the spread of chaos to further their cause. The barriers of entry in warfare, just as we've seen with drone attacks, are decreasing. These groups can cause more damage with a small personal risk to themselves. It's an issue that needs to be monitored further, and strategies need to be put in place to limit the power of these groups, especially through means of warfare that provide very little risk to them personally. In recent years, there have been some interesting developments. Joe Biden ended US support for Saudi forces who were acting in Yemen in February 2021. And a year later, the US revoked the Houthis as a terrorist organisation that existed on the terrorist list. Now, was this to try and encourage talks with the Houthis and improve living conditions for the suffering civilians in Yemen? Possibly. But unfortunately, it didn't work. A few months later, in April 2022, there was a UN-brokered peace deal. This eventually broke down, but it did last 6 months until October 2022. And since this date, fighting has been reduced prior to previous years. I'm aware there's been a very quick whistle-stop tour on the very complicated history in Yemen, but that brings us to the present day. I believe there are two potential explanations for what's going on currently with the Houthis. The first one relates to the China-brokered Saudi Arabia-Iran peace deal. One part of that deal was that the Iranians would stop supplying and providing support for the Houthis. Now, Iran benefits heavily from its economic and trade relationship with China. They are Iran's biggest partner for imports and exports. I think this geopolitical relationship is very important to Iran. and it's also very important for the world of geopolitics. We saw at the APEC summit in San Francisco between China and the United States that they seemingly came to some sort of understanding. The United States is coming into an election year. If they can avoid any rise in geopolitical tension that could affect the current administration's chances of getting re-elected, then they're definitely going to take that. China is currently having economic struggles. If they can have a quiet year in global geopolitics, they're also going to take that chance. As part of this deal, because China talks to Iran, they have some level of influence over them, especially because of the strong economic and trade connections. So, if as part of the wider United States-China APEC summit consequences, we see Iran prioritising its relationship with China and the China brokered peace deal with Saudi Arabia, we maybe could see Iran stop backing the Houthis. If this has occurred, I'd argue this is the Houthis' last hurrah. They're trying to show the damage they can cause, which they have achieved by limiting global maritime trade through the Red Sea. I think if this is the case, and all of these states I've mentioned actually want a calmer geopolitical environment, I think the question that arises is how long the Houthis can maintain this level of chaos. The US responded a few days ago by attacking a Houthi vessel, killing some members. So there is work being done to address the issues that the Houthis are causing in the Red Sea. The second option is that the Houthis are lashing out at increased US presence in the Middle East and Israel's current conflict with Hamas. The Houthi movement slogan contains 5 lines. 2 of those lines are death to America and death to Israel. I think that kind of demonstrates that the Houthis aren't particularly big fans of the Americans or the Israelis. This entire current situation with the Houthis could be them lashing out against what is currently occurring in the Gaza Strip. If this is the reason that the Houthis are spreading so much instability around the Middle East, the next question that arises is if they're doing this with Iran's backing or not. Iran benefits greatly from the strip of land that it currently has a large level of influence over that spreads to the Mediterranean. This goes through Iraq, Syria, and into Lebanon, which is on the Mediterranean Sea. Now, Lebanon contains the Hezbollah militia, who are known to be aligned with Iran. Hezbollah recently saw one of their senior figures killed this past week in an Israeli airstrike. And since the start of the conflict between Israel and Hamas, we've seen tensions with Hezbollah continue to rise. Now, could the Israelis launch some sort of operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon? That remains to be seen. But if they did, that would drastically weaken Iran, especially through their access to the Mediterranean. So the Houthis could be acting by themselves, for themselves, based on Iran stopping backing of the Houthis, or they could be acting for Iran's sake to maintain the pathway of influence that Iran holds in the Middle East. In my opinion, because of Iran's economic and trade links with China, and the fact that the United States has increased its presence in the Middle East as of late, and will have all eyes on how Iran responds to the current conflict in Gaza, I don't think Iran is involved in this on a state level, but Iran has many proxy groups. I think the most important question is if these proxy groups are acting on their own behalf for their own interests, or if they continue to act for Iranian interests, regardless of whether Iran want them to or not. This has been another episode of the Geopolitics Explained podcast. Thank you for giving me your time and listening. I appreciate it greatly. If you enjoyed it, please head over to the podcast platform of your choice and give the podcast a 5-star review or a like and a subscribe over on YouTube. You can find me everywhere through Geopolitics Explained. If you especially enjoyed this, I write twice a week over on Substack. You can find me there also under Geopolitics Explained, and if you subscribe, you'll receive emails directly to your email inbox. I'm also building a geopolitics database over there. This is free for all to navigate. You can explore all the content I've ever produced on the countries of the world, the commodities that we consider most important, and other topics closely related to the field of geopolitics. I've been Dylan. Thank you again. I'll talk to you next time.